Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. Welcome to WIP Wednesday, episode number 193. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about free motion quilting on a regular sewing machine, like a home sewing machine. Let me just prop up my iPad here that fell down with my chat. I need something heavier behind it. Let's put my clips. Okay. All right, let's pop into the chat. I just want to make sure everybody can see me and hear me. Hello. Everybody that's tuning in. Hi, Margie. Hey, Jackie. We got So Crafty. Hi, Janice. Monique is in the house. Hi, Nancy. Hey, Patricia. Oh, good. We have some friends on here. Awesome. Hi, Diana. Oh, she's asking if anyone's planning to attend QuiltCon in February. I will not be in attendance because I had already had a trip planned for, I think, a couple of weeks before it. So I can't swing the two trips back to back. But I will miss y'all this year. I did go last year and the year before, and that was a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun to go to QuiltCon. So. It's in Raleigh, North Carolina. Yeah. Hey, Janice. Hi, Deborah. Hey, Heather. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, Michelle. Wendy tuning in from tomorrow in Australia. Hi, Wendy. Awesome. Hey, Karen. Okay, so we are going to get started. I'm talking a little bit about free motion quilting today. Some of you that are in my Mystery Mini Bag Club might know that I mentioned in our last live Q&A that the next project is going to be a quilt. Like in terms of my courses and my clubs that I launch several times a year, the next class is going to be for a quilt. And I thought, what better way than to follow up the last couple of WIP Wednesdays that we've had teaching y'all how to do some different quilt blocks, some disappearing 4-patch blocks and things, to do a little bit of free motion quilting, because I know a lot of people are either still afraid to try free motion quilting on their home sewing machine, or maybe you've tried it in the past and you just haven't had really great results, and so you're just like, I'll just send it to a long armor, or maybe you even stopped quilting altogether, which would be sad. So we're going to go over some basics. I'm going to show you how I set up my JUKI LB5020 that I have up here. I'll talk about the free motion quilting foot that I like to use. There's a lot of different ones that you can use, but I will link to everything. I sent it out in the email newsletter as well as in the description box below in this video if you're watching us here on YouTube. If you're catching us on Facebook, it is also in the caption if you are looking for a free motion foot. So you can see how I'm going to use this one. We'll talk a little bit about the thread, and I have a couple quilt sandwiches that I did go ahead and set up so that we can work on a few exercises and share just some general tips and things for you to keep in mind if you want to try free motion quilting for the first time, or you're willing to give it another shot. The holidays right around the corner. Believe it or not, you have plenty of time still to make quilts, to make them and finish them and give them as gifts. All right. So let's get started. Laura says, yeah, I have a couple quilts ready for the quilting part. I have been putting it off. I feel you. I feel you. Now, with this over-the-shoulder shot here, showing you my current setup here with this regular just home sewing machine, this is not a semi-industrial or industrial, you know, like a high-powered straight stitch, which is what I usually prefer to quilt on if I'm not going to be throwing it on the long arm quilting frame. So I will be honest, it's been a long time since I actually sat down and did some free motion quilting to complete a project. So I think this would be a perfect time for me to share some tips with you so you can see that no, I have not been doing this for months and months and months recently. Yes, I've done it a lot over the last 2 decades, but it's been a while because I much prefer to use the long arm, right? And we'll talk about mainly why, because obviously, you know, I know that the long arm is not in everybody's budget. Let me grab a sheet of paper real quick because I do want to share a couple things so that you can wrap your head around what the difference is between quilting on a sewing machine and quilting on a long arm, okay? So if the sheet of paper is my quilt, okay, when we quilt on a long arm quilting machine, yes, it's an investment, but it's also a way for you to crank through. Literally, even if you don't have a computerized software program that runs the machine, if you're freehanding everything, you're still going to fly through it. I can quilt like a twin size quilt in under an hour. Like if it's just, you know, kind of edge to edge, free-form stippling, 45 minutes to an hour at the most. And that's like, what thread color should I use to match? Deciding really what type of design, if I just, okay, fine, we'll just finish it and I'll just do some overall, you know, meandering kind of like this. If I just want to do something simple like that and finish the quilt, just enough stitching to slam down the sandwich layers and get it done and bound and off to the recipient, that's fast. It's way faster on the long arm than on here, okay? And here is how I often like to explain it to my students. If your quilt is the paper, on a long arm quilting machine, you are the pencil. So as all of us have learned to write, we go like this. Meaning the paper is stationary, you are moving the pencil to do whatever you want. You can write, right? And so because we've been writing, not so much anymore these days, right? Everything is kind of on a device. But if you know how to use a pencil or a pen or a crayon or a marker, you can do long arm quilting, okay? Because you're already used to it and your brain is kind of trained to do something with this part of it while the paper or the quilt stays stationary. When we do sit down free motion quilting, like what I'm going to show here today, it's more like the machine is not being moved, right? The machine and the needle in this case is just going up and down. So in this case, this stays up. I wish I had another pair of hands. And you are moving the pencil. Excuse me, you're moving the paper. So it's kind of backwards. So if somebody told me write my name, okay, I could easily write my name moving the pencil, okay? But if somebody told me to do the same thing while the pencil is being held and I have to move the paper, then I have to be like thinking backwards, right? Because I have to kind of scoot the paper this way and then scoot the paper this way to get it to do the shape that I want it to do. So this is why a lot of times when quilters are like, oh, these people tell us all the time that we can quilt our own quilts on a machine, on our home machine, but you try it and you're just like, I just can't get it down. It's just not smooth. It's choppy. It's because it takes time to train your brain to moving the paper versus moving the pencil, right? Which is paper equals quilt, pencil equals the needle, okay? And so that is the main reason why. But yes, it does take thousands of hours if you want to get really, really good at doing some sit-down free motion quilting, but you don't have to be really, really good at free motion quilting to finish a quilt, okay? The same way I said that on a long arm, if I just want to get it done, I will often do like an all-over meander like this, nice and wide spaced out, because I know that my batting manufacturer tells me, you know, the quilting usually, depending on the batting that you're using, they tell you to have the stitching lines be within 8 inches. So if I do something like this, it's going to be way closer than 8 inches. So I know I'm not going to have any issues with that batting separating in between those quilting lines. Okay. Especially something that I like to do with my designs is like, and this is, I'm not talking custom design or anything like that. I'm talking the quilt top is done and we're trying to get this thing out the door. Meaning, it don't really matter what you're doing to it. You just need to have some stitching that goes through all 3 layers so you can get it bound and get it out, okay? So that's what I'm talking about. And so if you do this super close, like micro stippling, it's gonna take forever to quilt it, whether you're doing it on a home sewing machine or on the long arm. But if you space it out, this is what I'm talking about, that I can just do super fast on the long arm and get that thing out the door, okay? So when we do free motion quilting on here, the bigger the movements of the stitching kind of design that you want to take, the trickier it's going to be, okay? In other words, and what I'm talking about the trickiness is like the setup of the quilt. Because if you want to do a big swoop, you're going to need to have an extension table. Like you need to have that surface area that you're trying to swipe across cover enough space that you can do that with your quilt. So oftentimes we start students off with a little mini quilt sandwich like this, okay? Then I move you up to kind of something like this. Now really, if we're practicing designs, I don't really start students off on something this small because you can't really play with it enough. And most of it is kind of caught underneath here in the throat space and under the presser foot. So you don't really have a lot of quilt to grab, to manipulate, to do it. So I really just do this one as a little test piece, right? And when I say test piece, I'm talking about testing the needle that you have in the machine at the time, testing to see if you can see good and that presser foot that you have on is going to work for your free motion quilting, testing to see if the thread you have on is not going to break or shred, testing to see the tension above and underneath, okay? So you want to put together a little test sample sandwich, and we do this oftentimes on the long arm quilting machine as well. We'll have the batting be bigger, like you see here, except on the long arm I do a lot more, okay? Bigger of a piece of batting underneath the quilt top, as well as backing fabric. You see how the backing is even a little bit bigger than the batting? Because I like to have a strip on each side that I can throw on some scrap fabric and test my stitches there for speed, whether I want to be in manual mode or do some stitch regulated stitches and kind of adjust the setting, you know, whether it's 10 stitches per inch or more or less. And so I will have that little test piece on the side. When we're doing it on a sit down regular home sewing machine, throw yourself a little sandwich together so that you can test those things out before you jump into your regular project, because you know what's going to happen. You'll start a little bit and then you'll say, oh, I wanted to do some stippling, but I started too small. I'm never going to finish. Then you're going to stop. You're going to rip out those stitches and you're going to have to start again. So you kind of test all that out before you get into your project so your mind knows, okay, we're going big or we're doing just wiggly lines. Like this is one design that I love, love, love for beginners who are, like I said, just trying to quilt the quilt and get it out the door. It doesn't have to be super symmetrical. You're not doing little humps like this. You're not trying to mimic clamshells. We're not doing nothing fancy. It's a wiggle back and forth. That the wiggles can be closer or they can be more separate. It gives it a really cool, like, organic feel to it. And as long as you do a bunch of those across the whole quilt, nobody's going to know that it was a little closer on this line or a little bit more spread out. It just kind of all falls into place, adds some really good texture and design to the overall quilt. And the best part is it gets quilted and it's done. Okay. So, oh my gosh, Susie says she's taking 6 quilts to the long armor tomorrow. Too bad I can't do it myself. Yep. I mean, that's a lot of quilts to quilt yourself anyways, even for a long armor, but I'm sure that those are going to turn out amazing for you, Susie. Mary says, I have quilted free motion and the first time was a little rough, but as I continued, I got better. Absolutely. So it does take practice. Okay. So here, I'm going to just show you a little bit of something on here. Then we're going to kind of take this apart and deconstruct it so I can show you and tell you what needle I have in there, what presser foot I have in there, the extension table that I have on. You don't have to have it, okay? But if you have a wider base for your home sewing machine, that will definitely help, especially when you're trying to quilt larger projects. Now, something like this, if you did want to practice on a smaller chunk, would be great to get some practice in, probably in a thread that blends in easily to your fabric, and then you can cut it up and make zipper pouches, you know, like makeup pouches, and make all types of little projects that call for a quilted sandwich. So that's another option to use up those little practice quilt sandwiches on, okay? No Trip Quilting says, I use my Grace Little Rebel for larger quilts, but I have used my older machines for sit-down quilting. It's all about the rhythm. Indeed, it is. And speaking of rhythm, I will tell you exactly what I set my machine up so that you can see how it's working for me. And then you can adjust faster or a little bit slower for you as you get going with free motion quilting on your machine, okay? Suzanne says, I worry I'm going to break the needle while I'm moving the quilt sandwich around. That's a valid concern, but we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. So here's how it would be. If I wanted to test it out, I loaded up my glide thread here, which y'all by now know that that is my favorite thread to use for all free motion quilting as well as machine embroidery. Whether it's on a home sewing machine, on a smaller thing, or on my long arm, that's the thread I use. We sell it in a variety of colors. So the link is in the description box below, so you can check that out if you've never tried glide thread. And I'm just going to start stitching. Let me see if y'all can see my speed control here. So on this machine, the tortoise is all the way to the left. That's the slowest setting. And the hare here, the little rabbit, is the fastest. So on this small-ish piece, I tend to go a little bit slower than the max speed. If it was bigger, I'm usually on max speed, okay? And that's just what I have found works for me for sit down, okay? On the long arm, since I'm in complete control with the handles, I have that sucker going. If it's manual mode, I'm going as fast as I feel confident. I can't remember what the setting is on this one because if you didn't know, I recently upgraded my Handy Quilter Moxie long arm, which is a 15-inch throat space, to the Moxie XL. So now I have more throat space there, and I'll be working on some videos to share those with y'all as I work on quilting some new projects, okay? But anywho, I like to go really fast on there because, again, I'm used to writing with a pencil or a pen, and so it's easier for my brain to just go, go, go with those designs, okay? All right, so say I'm just doing some wiggly lines back and forth. You can see and probably hear the needle is going pretty fast, okay? It's not at the max speed, but it's going pretty fast, and it's going especially fast compared to the speed at which I'm moving my hand. So let's try it again and see if you can kind of keep track of how fast the needle's going up and down from the sound of it, and then look. You don't even need to like hear my hands. You just need to look at them, but see how much faster the needle is going, and then look at how slow my hands are moving. Okay, I have this machine set to needle down because it has that memory. You know, some machines, if it's kind of like a more vintage mechanical machine, you know how that is. That once you sew fast or slow, once you stop, that needle can stop at any position. Here I have it so that the machine is always going to stop with the needle in the project, which if you have that feature on your machine, I think it's going to be key, because that way you know you can breathe, you can remove your hands, you can just release some of the tension in your neck or your shoulder, and it's not going to lose the spot. You know that that needle is right there where it needs to be. And then you can even pivot. There's a fly in here that's driving me nuts. Okay. The temperature went from like 50s and 60s here to a solid 80 this morning. I was just like, oh, Florida. Okay. So I'm going to, because the needle is in, I can change positions. You can stop at any point and then just kind of like, okay, now I kind of want to come this way. And then you can just pivot it any way you want without losing your spot there. Okay. So I'm just going to come back around here. And I'm kind of just going little wiggly bits. Back and forth wiggly is going to be a lot easier than trying to swing it around in like a full swirl. That's pretty advanced. A lot of people think, oh, it's like a beginner swirl, you know, and it's really not. So like if I wanted to do a swirl, look at this. I have to stop and think how far in I'm keeping it and keep the lines spaced out enough that when I try to come back out of that swirl, I leave myself room to come out. So let's get this out of here, because I have, hold on, needle down, needle up. Let me just pull this out of here for now, because I'm using white thread on here. I'm going to pull this, I'm going to realign it, and then I'm just going to sink the needle down in that same spot and then bring it back up. And that way, hopefully, I bring up my bobbin thread. Yep, there it is. And then I'm just going to trim it. That way I don't have any tails on the back side of my quilt. So here's what I was saying about the swirl. Okay? If you come around, my pointer tool, I was like this. When I started here, I had to come in, and as I was going in, I had to leave room for this line. Okay, and then I came back out on this line, because you have to exit back out in between the line that you did to go inside the swirl. Does that make sense? That's way more for your brain to do if you're completely new to this. On the long arm, I can make it look way smoother than this. At a first go, in I don't know how many years on a sit-down machine, I would say that's not too bad. But I don't know if you can see it here or not, probably a little bit. Right here, these 3 stitches are a little bit longer than the rest of them. And that is the most, I would say, tricky part of doing sit-down free motion if you don't have a stitch regulator set up on your machine. There are some machines that have like a separate thing that regulates your stitches and all this kind of stuff. If you just have a regular home sewing machine and you're trying to do some wobbly lines and just do some swirls and stuff, you're not going to have stitch regulator on it, okay? And so what that means is that the speed at which you move your quilt determines the stitch length, okay? And so if the machine is going really fast and you move your hands really fast, chances are you can keep them pretty consistent in terms of the stitch length of those stitches. If the machine is going really fast and you are moving super slow, those stitches are going to be super teensy, okay? If you slow down the machine and you move your hands super fast, those stitches are going to be super long. So here I can tell, because everything else looks pretty consistent in terms of stitch length around most of it, in this area here, when I was swinging back out, I can tell that I swooped it way faster than I had been when I was going inside and kind of figuring out where I was going to exit out of this swirl. So I went faster here, and that's why the stitches are a little bit longer. So that is what happens when you're trying to do free motion quilting, okay? Now, another thing that I recommend, and as you can see here, is I'm using a white thread on a gray fabric. A lot of times you will see us do something more like this. And don't freak out. This quilting sandwich was me testing out the Moxie XL once I had installed it to make sure that I had, installed everything correctly and that nothing was a mess. So this was not done on a sit-down sewing machine. And I remember 17 years ago, when I first started quilting, and I sat down and quilted on a home sewing machine, but it was like a cheap plastic Husky Star, whatever. And my first quilt was wrecked because of how I quilted it. I was dating my husband at the time, and I told him, like, I love quilting, but like, I need a long arm. There's no way. I just cannot quilt on this little cheap plastic machine. So I have had a long arm I installed that thing when I was pregnant with Jonathan, huh? think you were at some type of a game, and I just hiked up the 70-pound machine and was like, I just cannot wait to turn this machine on and stitch. And so I set up my long arm. My son is 16, so almost 17 years ago. In December, I think will be 17 years. And so that's how badly I wanted to quilt, and knew that, like, yeah, I could practice on the sit down, but like I need a long arm because we're trying to get quilts done. So this is the stitching that I did. You can see I even did my name here. You can do a lot of fun stuff because, again, it's like the long arm is the pen or the pencil. So if you can write it, you can do it on a long arm, okay? But what I was gonna say here was we were talking about using a light colored thread on a light colored fabric, like a practice sandwich, okay? Because I find that when my beginner students go something like this, where they use a dark thread on a lighter fabric, or opposite, where you have your dark practice fabric and then you go with a really light thread, what happens is you have so much contrast that any little wobble, you're just like, yeah, I'm not really good at this. But if you practice as you're trying to kind of get the hang of it and wrap your brain around, you know, moving the quilt instead of moving the needle, if you can more closely match the thread color with the fabric that you're practicing on, I think it will help you with the confidence a little bit, okay? Yes, you still want to have a color that you can kind of see what you're doing, especially if you're starting off. You want to be able to like check the tension before you continue and try out other things, but this allows you still, even close up, you can see, okay, I was going super slow here, the stitches are super tiny, here they're a little bit bigger, so you can kind of get into the groove with the rhythm of trying to maintain a steady and consistent rhythm as the machine is still going at whatever max speed you have it set to go at, okay? So if you go dark thread on lighter fabric, just don't freak out because obviously it's gonna stand out. So if you mess up and you have like little jumps here, like you can see I was testing out, I was having an issue with the XY encoder, like the side to side movement. And so this, the stitches were going like really big, so I had to make some adjustments and all that. And so that's what I was testing out here, as you can see. Once I got it sorted, my stitches look a whole lot better. If you use a color that blends in a little bit, and maybe you think, I mean, you don't want to match it exactly either, because if we're testing it out, you know, making a little sample sandwich, we want to be able to see the stitches. I don't want it to just blend in and be like, oh, it looks great. And then you look at it up close and you're like, that tension was off. But because the bobbin thread and the top thread matched the fabric perfectly, you couldn't tell, right? You don't want that situation either. So don't set yourself up with a thread that's super, super high contrast either, unless you are okay knowing that like it looks like that because I have high contrast. Here I use like a pink thread, and you can see how much more control I have just because, you know, I've been long arming a long time. This is all freehand. I mean, if I do say so myself, it almost looks computerized, but it is all manual. Okay, this was not done on a stitch regulated mode, and that's because my first long arm I used that we got was manual. It was just an industrial Singer sewing machine that had been cut and stretched to give me like a longer throat space, and it was just a high-powered straight stitch machine. So you had to control everything. There was no electronics, you know, software stuff for that machine when I got it almost 2 decades ago. So I'm used to controlling that stitch length myself in manual mode. And so obviously that came with practice and time. But the point is, you got to practice, make sure that you have the right thread and the right setup, and that you set yourself up with a color that's close to the fabric so that you don't freak out and just, you know, pinpoint all your mistakes and how it looks, and it looks ugly, and you can see where I retraced over my steps here and there. It's going to look like that, okay? So don't do it. Just pick a color that blends in easier so you can be a little bit easier on yourself as you build up those practice hours, okay? Hi, Donna. Oh, she says, awesome samples. Thank you. Yeah, and you can make samples like that and then chop them up and make all kinds of cute little projects, okay? I usually have, I think on the back here in these machines, I usually have like a little basket made from a quilt sandwich sample that you just make like a little bin, you know, to throw your threads when you're trimming threads as you're working. Those type of little baskets and containers work really well with those quilted sandwiches. All right, let's see. Yes, Gloria says free motion quilting is very possible. She uses gray, light yellow, or tan for a thread color. My most favorite color to use most often is a gray color because I usually have quilts that mix and match, some lights, some darks, some high contrast, which I love for pops of color. And I find that that gray, like a mid-tone gray, blends in beautifully for light, medium, and even some darker fabrics depending on the overall quilt, right? Linda says, could you use a darker thread so we can see what you're doing? Yep, and I'm gonna do that next because we're gonna deconstruct this and then set it back up so you can see the setup, okay? So, my legs plop down. I have the extension table here, and this machine has it so that the extension tables pop up, and then you can kind of unscrew the little wheels here at the bottom depending on the height, you know, so you can get it as level as possible with this. All right, so here we go. If I was gonna sit down and practice free motion quilting, here's what I would do. I'm gonna keep the bobbin color the same, y'all, so just pretend. I did wind the exact same glide thread, okay, on a bobbin. So that's that. And actually, maybe I won't. Well, I'll go through the whole thing. Let me grab another color of glide from here. Let's do this red one, this maroony color. This is called Hokies. What school is that, Brandon? Is this red color for Virginia Tech? Okay, that's where they got it from. Great. Okay, so I'm going to put this on here. I'm going to grab an empty bobbin, and I'm going to wind a bobbin the exact same way that you would for regular sewing, okay? They do sell pre-wound bobbins. Glide does. I buy the bigger ones for the long arm, but I don't have them in little like this for like a class 15 bobbin for this machine. So I'm going to, whoops, wrong one, set it up here. And let's wind a bobbin. I'm not going to wind the full bobbin, but this is a 40 weight polyester thread. It's pretty slick. I shouldn't have done that. I should have held on to it because it is slick. So it doesn't necessarily work like your, come on. I should have probably wound it correctly. Y'all know me. I don't like to do the little thing where it goes through the hole. I just wrap it around and the tension usually holds it. Well, for cotton thread at least. There we go. All right, so we're winding the bobbin. I'm only going to put a little bit on it since this is just a test piece, but same thread in the bobbin. That's going to be the best setup, I think, most successful setup for beginners. Don't start switching it up where you have one color there and you want to have a bobbin with a different color so it matches the backing fabric. That's a little bit more advanced, although if you've done that before for other projects and you know that it works well for your machine, feel free to do it. I'm just trying to give y'all like the most entry-level way to do this stuff so that you have the most successful results, because literally just having to troubleshoot some of these issues will make you want to throw your machine and the quilt out the window. Okay, I have a little bit of the glide thread in the bobbin. I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to thread my machine. The needle I have in there is a Schmetz quilting needle. This is a size 90-14. You don't necessarily need a 90-14, okay? The 90-14 I use if I'm using like a medium to heavier weight batting, or maybe the fabric that I'm using I know is like from a manufacturer that the fabric is a little bit thicker. You can get away with like a size 80-12 quilting needle. I know some people quilt with like a top stitching needle. Whatever works for you. I would not use, you know, like a jersey or a ballpoint needle. You're not gonna like that. Stitching with that at high speeds for quilting on a woven fabric, that needle is obviously not for that. Okay, so a quilting needle, a top stitch, and even for some smaller projects, I have easily gotten away with a universal needle. But if you have a little pack of quilting needles, take them out. You can put them to use. Okay, now we talk thread. Bobbin, same thread, right? In the bobbin and the top. Let me take off this presser foot so that we can talk a little bit about this. This is my preferred presser foot. It is not a JUKI foot. It is just like an off-brand name presser foot that I get off of Amazon. I did go ahead and link to it. If you have a low shank sewing machine, you might want to try this one. I put it in the email newsletter today for $5. If you've been on the fence of trying free motion quilting and you have the thread and you have everything else for $5, grab it. I like it because it has a cutout here, makes it nice, wide, and open for me to see what's going on. And it is metal, but the cutout inside doesn't have any plastic in it. It's just big and open. And so it allows me to see exactly what I'm doing. And once you start doing more free motion quilting, you'll see, because whether it's on a long arm or here, we're not really looking at where the machine is stitching right then. I'm looking ahead to make sure that I have a gap of where I want to go next with the stitching. So this cutout and this bigger space there really allows me to see what I'm doing and where I'm going. And so this is why I like this one. There's some other ones. I mean, they call them different things, like a free motion quilting foot, a darning foot, a stippling foot, a whatever foot. There's different ones. Like this one, sometimes people use it, but you see how it has a little hole and it's closed and it's tighter and smaller? This is not a favorite. This one for sure is my favorite. Now, this one that I linked to in the description box and in my email newsletter is for the low shank, okay? You need to check and make sure that your machine is low shank. If it's not, then just do a search for the high shank version of this one, okay? And I think on the Amazon listing that I link you to, there is an image there that shows high shank, low shank, and then I think like a slant shank that are only for very specific Singer machines that have a slant shank. This is a low shank machine. This one works on most of these kind of more modern Brother, Singer, Janome, JUKI. Not all models. You have to make sure that your machine is the low shank for this specific foot to fit. But the low shank portion basically means this ankle part, okay? That this is my regular presser foot. You see it? This machine has clip-on feet. This is like the ankle portion that stays there. So you know, if we're switching off a zipper foot to the universal foot to a buttonhole foot, this is the part that we're changing while this remains. Well, to install this foot, I remove the whole ankle because this has it built in here, okay? And so the low shank is 1/2 inch from here where the screw goes in to where the presser foot goes in. The high shank, I think it's like 1 inch. So it's a way higher distance. So that's why you need to make sure that you have the right one, because where the screw screws in here, you want to make sure that you have the correct distance from the presser foot to where that screw goes in for your specific machine, okay? So I'm just putting this around the little screw that's there, and make sure that this little bar, if you've used the walking foot before, you know what this is. This little bar needs to go on top of my needle bar. You know that needle bar that sometimes you're sewing and your hand gets close and it hits you and you think you just got sewn over, but it's really just the needle bar that tapped you? That needle bar. It needs to go above that, okay? So I'm going to just wrap it around the ankle. Make sure my bar is on top of the needle bar. It is. I'm going to just screw this on by hand, finger tight, and then I'll take my little screwdriver and just finish tightening it into place. Boom. Nice and tight. Don't let it be a little loose because, whoo, at that high speed, you do not want that thing to slip off and the needle hit it, okay? So, thread, same in the bobbin. I do not recommend using a cotton thread for free motion quilting unless you're kind of going to be going a little bit slow, because cotton thread does not hold up as well as a synthetic polyester thread to the high speeds and all the directionality. You know, we're moving, we're swishing, and we're going fast. It tends to shred and break more easily than the man-made synthetic threads. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you've ever tried it and you only use cotton thread and the thread kept breaking, remember me and put in some polyester thread. Okay. Let's see. Kathy says, I've done some quilting on placemats, which is an easy way to practice. It absolutely is. Linda says, I've tried both. It just seems to get hung up going from left to right. Let me see what she's saying up top. But she also, could you use a darker thread? Okay, so I'm using the darker thread. Oh, she says, I wish I could come to Florida with my TL18. It does a horrible job at FMQ. So I have a series of about 7 videos on YouTube. If you do a YouTube search for Crafty Gemini Free Motion Quilting, that playlist and those videos should pop right up for you. And I actually do the whole series with beginner exercises. I show you how I set up the machine, which is a bigger machine. It's a high-powered, you know, semi-industrial straight stitch machine. And I show you how to set it up and some beginner exercises for beginners on my JUKI TL2010Q, which is the same type of machine as a TL18. It's just 11 years old. You know what I mean? Like, at least mine is. I think it's 10 or 11 years old. So try that out and see if you kind of have the same setup on your TL18 as I do. If it gets hung up going left to right, that might be maybe the needle that you're using, the eye is not large enough, because when we are moving, that needle is being deflected a little bit because it's not just staying where it needs to go. You're kind of moving the quilt sandwich around, so you are, you know, doing a little something to that needle, causing it to deflect a bit, especially at high speeds. And so you got to be careful with that and make sure that the thread has a big enough needle eye to go through at those higher speeds. So check out that series and see if you don't give, you know, your TL18 another try, because I mean, it's a really great machine. All right. Oh, good. Winless Original says it's a great series. It's how I got started with free motion quilting. I love to hear that. Where's my little cap? Here we go. Okay. We talk thread. We talk presser foot. Okay. Next thing, if you look down here, let me scoot y'all in since it's okay. I already went ahead and put down my feed dogs. So here are the metal feed dogs, and they are underneath the metal part here. I did that by just hitting this little thing here. Whoop, there we go. It was to this side, feed dogs up, and then I just scooted it that way, and the feed dogs dropped. Quick side note, if you have a machine like this and you put the feed dogs down, you practice your free motion quilting, you put it away for the day, the next day, you know, a week later or something, you go to work on a different project and you're trying to figure out why your project is sliding around and the feed dogs are not up. You may have, one, forgotten to put it up, right? Put it back to its original thing. But also, when you do put it up, the feed dogs are not just gonna pop up. You have to take a stitch. So take the first stitch and then you will see that they come up. So a lot of people freak out because they're like, I put the feed dogs up, and I'll show you exactly what I mean, okay? Feed dogs here, I'm gonna turn them back up. Nothing happens here. And so they're thinking, oh no, I moved the feed dogs up, but I don't see them. You need to take a stitch. So if I take a stitch, boom, they popped up, okay? So just remember that. I'm gonna save you hours. You're welcome. Okay, let's put feed dogs back down. Back down. Feed dogs are down. Depending on the sewing machine make and model that you have, it may call for like a little plastic cap that you need to put on here and screw it into place or do whatever, right? Every manufacturer is going to have their own setup. But look and see what the setup is for your machine for free motion quilting. I will say also, some people do not put the feed dogs down, okay? It's up to you. Do a little bit of practice with both and see what works best for you, okay? I go ahead and put them down because I tend to swipe fast and I just want nothing trying to hold me in the way, okay? If you have them set, I think if you do, what do people do? They put feed dogs up and they go to a stitch length of 0.0 so that the feed dogs are not actually pulling your stuff forward and still allow you to move. So you can kind of get to the same, you know, the same type of setup a couple different ways. I dropped the feed dogs down and now we're just gonna swipe around, okay? So let me put this up. Okay. Oh, Heather says she would love a long arm, but she doesn't have the space. I'm trying the tabletop mini. We'll see how that goes. Let me know how that goes. Yeah, if you don't have space, it's tricky. In this room here, I went ahead, well, the Moxie here, I was able to set it up on the Handy Quilter loft frame, and I set it up to 8 foot, which I love, because my other long arm is set up at 12 feet. And that was like in a separate studio. You know, I had that in a spare bedroom when we first got it. And then I got it put in one of my old shed studio there. And it was set up at 12 foot, like the full width of that room. Here, I couldn't swing that. So, I mean, I didn't need it because even a queen size quilt I can do on here. So I didn't need much more than 8 feet. And I'm glad that I can get the Moxie XL. So more throat space, but still to the same 8 feet. Okay, for a home quilter, I think that works. And I think they have it in 5 foot. And I think you can maybe add a 2 foot add-on to 7 foot. So if you need a little bit less than 8, that's another option. So yeah, I mean, you know, do some research and see if you're looking for something in that range. You know, sometimes people are looking for one to put in a cabin or something, you know, when they're on vacation, they want to quilt their quilts. There are some different options, okay? Let's see. Yes, Brenda says, I need to get rid of my fears of free motion quilting. Yes, so hopefully this will give you a little bit of confidence. Brenda, here we go. I got a quilt sandwich and I didn't spray base this. It's not hand based. It's nothing because the pieces are kind of small. So I just have a gray fabric, my Quilter's Dream cotton batting, natural here, not bleached or nothing, and then just some cotton fabric on the back. Okay. You don't have to start in the middle. I'm just going to start in the middle because I think y'all can probably see it better that way. Apologies for the glare. There's all kinds of lights going on. Lights from here, lights from here. Okay. So I hold the top thread. I'm going to sink the needle down. Then I'm going to press the same button to bring the needle up. If your machine doesn't have a needle up down, just turn the hand wheel towards you to take one full stitch, okay? Can you see that there, how I brought up a loop? That means my bobbin thread is up. So I'm going to pull on that loop, and there's my bobbin thread. So now what do I have? Now I have bobbin thread is coming out from the fabric, and the top thread is on top. This makes it so you have a smooth finish on the back of your quilt and you don't constantly have to be, you know, once you're done quilting, having to go in and bury all those threads. Although you can if you would like that. That's not my life. Okay. Now, once I have both threads up top here, I try to center this back up so that the needle is directly above the hole that the bobbin thread is coming out of. And I'm going to sink it back down because now it's like I brought up the bobbin thread, but now let's take a few stitches right in that spot to kind of anchor down that bobbin thread so we don't have thread tails that are coming loose, okay? My presser foot is down, although y'all see room under here, right? Okay. Just remember that. Don't freak out and think my presser foot is up. It's not. Mine is already down. So I'm going to go needle down. Ooh, I got it right in the same spot. Needle up. That's 1 stitch. Needle down, needle up. That's 2. I usually do 2 or 3. You could do whatever you want, okay? So there goes 3. And then I'll just sink it back down. So I basically brought up the bobbin thread and did a little lock stitch in place. Now I leave these tails here. I'm going to quilt a little bit and get away from those tails. Once I'm away from it, I can then get some scissors or snips and get close to that, and I can cut it close to the top of my quilt sandwich here and get rid of these tails, and I won't have any tails hanging off in the back, okay? All right, so my speed, I said, is just a little bit less than the full max speed here, okay? And I'm just going to do something. Let's do something. I don't know what I'm doing. But again, don't judge me too harshly because I just told y'all don't use a darker thread than your fabric because you're going to see every little bobble. But here we go. I'm going to do the exercise that I recommend for beginners, which is just a line, just a slight wiggle back and forth. I find that, one, it looks good. So if you had to do a whole project, it's good enough to get it done without fancy back and forths and going all this and that. You can just go in one direction. For that, I would probably want it to have started up top and then came the whole width of the fabric, right, of the quilt top. And 2, it's going to help you just learn how to manipulate the quilt sandwich to get it to go where you want to without jumping right into like feathers or something wild, okay? So I'm going to have both hands here. Now, speaking of hands, there are all kinds of little tools on the market. We don't have any of these in stock anymore, but we used to sell these. They're just little gloves. You know, you can use a different glove. Sometimes people buy just regular gloves and they cut the fingertips off of them so they can use their hands, the fingertips. There's some grippy gloves. I'm waiting for some, and I will list them. We may do a little Black Friday sale on some other different little gloves there that are super affordable, and so I will send out the email on that. So just be on the lookout. But this just has kind of a grippy bit here. This works really well for bigger stuff, right? For here, I could use it because this rectangle or this square is a lot bigger. On this guy here, because it's such a small piece, you really only have enough room for fingertips. So this is not great to use on smaller projects. Does that make sense? This is so that I have grip, okay, on a bigger thing. But you could do your fingertips too. It's just a matter of personal preference. Everybody that ends up doing free motion quilting a lot has developed their own system. So I'm just trying to share with y'all, you know, a bunch of different little things for you to try. If you have these gloves at home, take them out, put them to use, okay? Let me not tighten them too tight. My hands are kind of big. Okay, so I'm just gonna go wiggle, wiggle, wiggle back and forth till I get to the edge here. So let's go. Now, like I tell kids when I teach them, you see how far under the machine my hands are? I have 3 or 4 more inches left to go. I'm not going to keep going and have it be here because guess what? The area of the quilt sandwich that is then closest to, like, approaching the needle, I have no control over it. It's way behind where my hands are. So you do want to go a little bit and stop. That's why I think it's important to have that needle up, down, so that when I stop, it already automatically stops with the needle in. My hands were back here. I can stop, pick up my hands, and reposition them here so that I continue to have control over the bit that is now approaching the needle. Very important. Let me see where I was going. Okay. And now I came to the edge. The needle is down, so I don't even have to stop, cut my thread, do all of that. We're going to lift the presser foot, and I'm just going to turn it so y'all can see what I did. You can see this was my switching point. I took way too many stitches, probably like 2 or 3 in the same spot, When I started back up, I should have started moving right off. You know, once I started going, right there, move. So keep that in mind when you run your sample, you know, your sample designs, okay? I'm gonna come down a little bit. Say you wanted to do lines like this down your whole quilt. I'm gonna come down maybe 3/4 of an inch. Do not lock yourself into having to do this micro match stitch type of quilting that is 1/8 of an inch apart. It's going to take you a long time to do the quilt, okay? If your quilt batting says that you need to have your quilting be 8 inches, you know, no more than 8 inches apart, what does that mean for us? If you're running lines like this down a whole quilt, you don't need to go, you know, every 3 inches or every 4 inches. You can go every 5 or 6. So again, depending on how quick you need to finish that quilt, there's things you can do. Okay, if you do want to have kind of an all over texture, then feel free to just go like 1 inch down, 3/4 of an inch. Just know that the more close together these lines are, the longer it's going to take and the more thread it's going to eat up. So I'm just going to run down the line to like right here, let's say. The needle is in, I'm lifting my presser foot, I'm going to pivot it, and now we're going to quilt the same kind of wiggle all the way here. Okay? It's just a slight back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. See what I did there? I should not have done that. I just said stop and reposition your hands. And I didn't do it. But it just depends. If you do it like this and you like how it looks, continue to do it. If you're like, no, I should have stopped and just started stitching right when I started going again, then do that. So this is the part that I'm talking about. It takes practice, okay? Here, I went a little too straight. I could have probably stood to go a little bit more wobbly. So this feels like I'm barely moving it to me. So here's what I'm gonna do. Oh, let me trim this now. And so this is why it's important to do practice sandwiches, okay? Because you're gonna like one thing more than the other. And so once you sort out what you like, it's going to be a lot easier, I think, to be more consistent throughout. So now we're going to do the same thing here. And what I'm going to do is instead of having it like be barely a bobble, I'm going to try to give it a little bit more curvature. Okay? Press her foot down. And I'm trying to keep a rhythm, even though it's hard. Okay. It's so opposite than my long arm. All right, let's have a look at this one and critique it. So my ups and downs are a little bit more pronounced. I stopped somewhere here, but I don't have that little buildup because as soon as it started stitching, I just started moving it right there, okay? Because remember, that happens because the machine is going at whatever speed you have set it to. And remember I said, your stitch length is directly connected to how fast you're moving the fabric. So think about it. If I start stitching and I don't move the fabric, it's still just going to stay stitching right in place. And that's what happened here. If you start stitching and right as that needle is taking the first stitch, you start moving, you have now created a stitch with whatever the stitch length is there based on how much you moved it, right? So it was somewhere here, I think, in a little bit straighter of an area, and right there I just kept going. So I don't have that buildup here because I started moving my quilt sandwich as soon as I kicked off. So these are little things that you need to kind of analyze to be able to troubleshoot and tell yourself what you need to do so that the whole thing looks a little bit more consistent, okay? This here, I think, looks crazy because it's such a dark colored thread on such a light colored fabric. I would never do this. However, if I did, I mean, unless you were like writing something or you're on purpose trying to get something to pop, right, on a lighter background. But if I did this in gray thread and did this through the whole way, I think it would blend in beautifully. It would just look like added movement and texture to the overall quilt, okay? Same thing for the back. Because I have the bobbin that matches the thread on top, that red on there looks wild. But it's also a good way for you to check. And my stitch length is pretty consistent throughout. There's a couple that are a little bit bigger, but by bigger, they're not like 3 millimeters long. I would still say they're in that 2 to 2.5 millimeter range, which is fine. It's not like a basting stitch, okay? Let's see. Oh, Heather says she has to wait. She's like, that's the dream, but I need to wait for my kids to move out. I feel you, girl. Lori's asking, what kind of thread do I use on the Moxie? I use the glide thread, the same thread I'm using here. So I love it because it's like an all-purpose. It has a sheen to it. Here, you can see it probably on this white one. It has a nice sheen to it. It works beautifully. All my machines love it. Whether it's this JUKI my bigger JUKI, my semi-industrial TL2010Q JUKI, the computerized JUKIs that we take to some classes and retreats, the long arms, all of them, all my long arms like this. So, and machine embroidery too, because it has that sheen to it. And I have it in a ton of different colors. We do carry it also in a ton of different colors. And we have the link to the shop in the description box below in case anybody's interested in getting some. Donna says, do you use your long arm? Of course, I absolutely do use my long arm. Robin says, I have trouble keeping consistent speed with the foot pedal, and then the stitches are all different sizes. So here's a tip for you, Robin. You should not be controlling the speed of the machine with the foot pedal, which I know doesn't make a lot of sense for those of you that have machines that do not have a speed control, okay? So when I teach this, or when I used to teach it in person, when people would show up with like a vintage machine that did not have speed control, meaning how much pressure you put on that foot pedal determines how fast the machine goes, like those basic, mechanical machines like that. What I teach is floor the machine and only focus on your hands. It removes one of the different elements, right, of the mix. Trying to control the speed while you're moving is going to be very difficult, especially if you're trying to kind of match up the speed of the machine to your hands. You don't want to do that. So what I recommend is just floor the machine so you don't have to think about it. Okay, just make it go as fast as it can. Just keep your foot flat on it, and then just worry about slowing down your hands, maybe speeding them up a little bit until you find a groove of what pace and speed works best for you while the machine is going to its full speed, okay? I'm gonna come across here and do the same thing. And so you can see that you can pretty much do something like this, and this is just 2 fingers apart. It's about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches spacing. And even if it was a big quilt, like you could do this pretty quickly, as opposed to sitting there and trying to do custom quilting for every single little thing. So yeah, try that out and see if that works. D says, so it doesn't matter what you have your machine stitch length setting on. It doesn't if you drop the feed dogs, right? Because the stitch length is connected to how much the machine is pulling. So if we have a longer stitch length, that's you telling the feed dogs, I want you to pull more fabric between the up and down of the needle, okay? So if the feed dogs are removed from the equation, now there is no stitch length, meaning if I sit here and I don't touch nothing because my feed dogs are down and I just stitch, it's just gonna stitch up and down, okay? It moved a little bit because of the weight of the machine, but there's no actual feed dogs pulling it, so you have to control that part. So yes, it don't matter if I have my stitch length set to 5 or to 0. If my feed dogs are down, I'm still controlling everything. I'm going to stop and let's see if I can pick it up again. And this is how you practice, right? I saw the one where I started stitching and started moving immediately. It looked better than the one where I let it take a few stitches in place and then took off. So let's see. Oh, I moved a little too quick. I saw the stitches go a little bit big. But overall looks pretty good. And you can see that my lines are getting better and better. So even with a little bit of practice, just stop, look at it, analyze. Do I want it straighter? Do I want it more wiggly than that? Do I like the spacing? Just take your little notes on stuff like that. And even if you do a full piece like this is maybe a 13-inch square piece. I promise by the time you do these little simple wiggly lines back just on this square, you'll be ready to put it onto a quilt and it's going to look pretty good. Okay? So give that a go. Again, I'm going to come here and I'm walking basically along the edge. So staying like 1/8 of an inch along, you can walk across any of these outer edges because all those edges are going to be covered by your quilt binding, right? So don't feel like, oh no, I have to stop and cut the thread. I have not stopped and cut the thread not once. And I've done all these lines of stitching. This one is part way, obviously because we started in the middle, but you can see that I can walk back and forth along that. As long as it's in that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, because that's what my binding is mostly going to cover, I can do whatever I want in that outer edge and get to anywhere else that I need to by doing that instead of stopping, cutting, bringing up the bobbin thread again, taking a few lock stitches and all that. And that's why custom quilting, if you've ever had a long arm or do custom quilting for you, is a lot more expensive by square inch than just an all over design, okay? So I'm going to come a little bit over, again, stop, needle down, scoot this, boom, and then let's do these wiggly lines again. And it's just back and forth. Okay, I'm going to stop, reposition my hands, and I'm going to try to not have it take off once it starts stitching again, but I don't want to stay in the same spot, so I got to find that happy medium. Oh, I made it take a few stitches in place. I should not have done that. I don't know what I was thinking. But again, you see it way more pronounced because it's red on gray. And that is not ideally what I would use on something like this. But here we go. Can you see how everything is like smooth? I was in the rhythm, and this just looks like bloop and like a full pivot right there. And that's because this is the stopping point where I stop, reposition my hands. So if you do something like that and you just cannot work your way out of it, where you're just like, oh, I keep doing it, try to do it in a spot that is going to blend, or again, do it with a color that blends in so that those little bobbles don't show or aren't as pronounced, okay? So this is what I mean by, like, even if you're practicing and you're using a high contrast thread to the fabric, I mean, you're gonna be like, oh, I just can't get it. You're not gonna make it look super, super perfect to something that is done organically with your hands. I mean, it's art, really, okay? It's functional art because we get to use the quilt and the stitches are serving a purpose to hold the 3 layers together. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like a decorative way of fulfilling that purpose of the quilting through the layers, okay? So help yourself out, boost your confidence, don't feel bad about yourself instead, and use a thread color that blends in a little bit more easily. Trust me, you're gonna be like, I'm pretty good at this quilting stuff if you do that, okay? Let's see. Kuma Cat is asking, could you also do a tutorial using the TL18 or comparable? So I don't have the TL18, I have the TL2010Q, and that's what the videos that I used or that I've made on a semi-industrial Juki are. So I would definitely recommend checking out those videos that I have. Yeah, let's see. Gloria says, when you sew left to right on the quilt, then do you have to sew top to bottom of the quilt? So if you sew left to right on the quilt, do you also have to go in and sew the other direction? You don't, unless that's the design that you're going for, kind of like a gridded design, but absolutely not. Okay, now that's part of what I teach you in that free motion quilting series that I have. You can see that for something like this, notice my preferred method here is to stitch front to back, okay? So in other words, for another line of wiggly lines here, I don't go from here like this and start quilting this way, okay? A couple of reasons. One, it's not comfortable for me. 2, I have way more project here than I have throat space. So if I'm working in the direction of the throat space, I know that this is gonna get jammed up here. It's gonna throw the last chunk of this, the last half is gonna be a wreck. Okay, it's not gonna look good because I'm gonna be fighting with it, trying to stuff it in here. So you also have to think about the direction, the design that you are doing, okay? So some people, I like to go this way, okay? Some people might like to go this way and start working the bulk of the project in this direction. For me, that's not gonna work because the whole point of this cutout presser foot is so I can see where I'm approaching. If the bulk of my quilt project is behind my machine, I can't see what's going on back here. Okay, so think about that as well. And there are some designs, if you watch that free motion quilting video series that I have on YouTube, you will see that some designs are easier for me to do, like left to right, than they are front and back. And so again, it's all about practicing it, trying it a couple different ways, and then being like, yeah, that don't work for me. I like the other way better. But if you only try one way and it doesn't work, you're gonna think it's the whole thing that don't work for you. Okay, so I like to try and set y'all up with a few different ways so that you can figure out, you know, what works best for you. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think I'll just leave y'all with that. Like this little back and forth wiggle, I have quilts that have been in magazines and have a wiggle back and forth like that. So don't think like, oh, it doesn't look as fancy, it doesn't look like done by machine. That's the whole point. We want it to look like an actual human did it, especially when you're just doing it in a color that blends in and you kind of want to add a little bit of movement or texture to the overall design while serving the purpose of holding your quilt sandwich together, okay? I'm trying to look, but these quilts are on the wall. Some of them have that. Some of them have like more custom quilting up there, but different options. This is a simple way, I think, to just get you load it up on your machine, grab that presser foot that I put in the link in the description box below, sit down with some quilt sandwiches, even if it's a fat quarter. A fat quarter is a good big size. If you can do some wiggly lines back and forth like that on a full fat quarter quilt sandwich, you can absolutely do it on a quilt, okay? Kuma Cat is asking about a tutorial on using the ruler foot with a ruler, obviously. So the only ruler work stuff that I've done really is on long arms. So I don't have ruler foot tutorials on here, even though I think I do have like ruler foot templates and stuff that have come out in the past. I just never have used them on a sit-down machine, I don't think. All right. Oh, good. Myrna says, I'm excited to start my first quilt. The demonstration is inspiring me to start. I'm so glad to hear that. She says, oh, good, good. Oh, whatever JUKI you got, you're going to love it. So Dee says, I usually machine quilt with the feed dogs up using the serpentine stitch. So you can do that too, but if you want to practice more free motion where you're in control, try this, okay? Because with the feed dogs up, the machine is pulling the quilt sandwich and the fabric layers through, and obviously the serpentine stitch, it's telling, you know, it's doing what it's going to do because it's already one of the computerized stitches. So if you want to try it yourself where you're in control, give this setup a try, okay? All right, and I think that is going to be it for today's free motion quilting tips. Hopefully you got some tips. If you're still a little bit intimidated by trying free motion quilting on your home sewing machine, go back to the beginning of this episode and watch this episode and just, you know, follow along and set up everything exactly like I did here and give it a try, okay? Don't give up on the first try, even if you're a little frustrated, stick with it. Even, like I said, if you start off with a piece that's about 13 inches by 13 inches or even a fat quarter size piece, get through that chunk and I guarantee you're gonna feel a little bit more confident and you should be able to kind of troubleshoot a few different little things or what you're doing in terms of the speed of the machine and the speed at which you're moving your hands and the quilt sandwich, okay? Thank you everybody for the great questions and thanks for tuning in for today's episode of WIP Wednesday. I will see y'all in the next video.